The doctor said it was stress, but stress doesn't make your hands shake like that when you see two lines instead of one. I was still holding the test in my coat pocket when the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, the kind that felt too calm for the way my heart was racing. And I remember thinking how strange it was that the world outside the hospital kept moving like nothing had changed while mine had already split into before and after. Before, I was just a wife trying to fix something that had been quietly breaking for months, and after, I was a woman carrying a life inside her, standing alone in a city that suddenly felt too big and too cold. The rain hit the pavement in steady sheets as I stepped outside, soaking through my sneakers in seconds. But I didn't run for cover because I barely felt it. My fingers curled instinctively over my stomach as if I could already protect something that small from everything I didn't understand yet. Daniel was supposed to meet me tonight. That's what he said over text. Let's talk. Dinner. 7 p.m. Simple. Normal. Like we were still the couple we pretended to be in public. I took a cab across town, watching the blurred city lights smear across the window, rehearsing the moment in my head over and over again. The way I would tell him, the way his face would soften, the way maybe, just maybe, this would fix us. When the car pulled up to the restaurant, I hesitated for exactly 3 seconds before stepping out, the neon sign reflecting in the puddles at my feet, my pulse loud in my ears as I pushed the door open. Warm air wrapped around me, filled with the low hum of conversation and the clink of glasses, and for a second, everything felt almost normal until I saw him. Daniel was already there, sitting at a corner table, smiling, not at me, at her. She leaned forward when she laughed, her hand resting lightly on his, and he didn't pull away, didn't even look uncomfortable, just relaxed into it like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stopped walking. My body understood before my mind could catch up. The noise around me faded into something distant and muffled, like I was underwater, and all I could see was the way he reached across the table to adjust her napkin, the same small, careful gesture he used to do for me, like I mattered. My fingers tightened against my stomach, instinctive, protective, as something inside me shifted, not pain, not yet, just a quiet realization settling in deeper than anything I'd ever felt before. I wasn't part of his life anymore. I hadn't been for a while. I just hadn't seen it clearly until now. I turned before he could notice me, my breath uneven, my steps unsteady as I moved toward the exit, the polished floor suddenly feeling too slippery under my feet. And then it happened. A sharp collision, someone brushing past me too fast, my balance tipping forward, my hand shooting out to catch myself, panic flashing through me not for me, but for the fragile life I was carrying. And just before the world could tilt too far, a hand caught my arm. Firm, steady, unyielding. I froze. Not because of the grip, because of the presence behind it. Whoever he was, he didn't rush. He didn't ask if I was okay right away. He just held me there, keeping me from falling, like the outcome had already been decided the moment he stepped in. And for the first time that night, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt seen. I did not pull away, not immediately, because my body needed a second to understand that I was no longer falling, that the sudden rush of panic had been stopped by something solid and unshakable. And when I finally turned, it was not relief that hit me first, it was the silence, the kind of silence that does not belong in a crowded restaurant, but somehow formed around him like an invisible boundary. He was taller than I expected, easily over 6 feet, dressed in a dark suit that fit like it had been made specifically for him, every line precise, every detail controlled. But it was not the suit that made people notice him. It was the way he stood, completely still, completely certain, like the room adjusted itself around his presence without him needing to ask. His hand remained on my arm for a fraction longer than necessary, not gripping, not restraining, just there, steady, grounding, and when his eyes met mine, I felt it again, that strange shift in my chest, not fear exactly, not comfort either, something in between that made it impossible to look away. Careful, he said, his voice low, calm, carrying a weight that did not need to be raised to be heard, and I realized then that he had already noticed everything. The way my breath was uneven, the way my fingers were still curled protectively over my stomach, the way I kept glancing toward the corner of the room without meaning to. I swallowed, trying to gather whatever dignity I had left, and nodded once, stepping back, but his hand did not drop right away, like he was making sure I would not lose my balance again before finally letting go. I should have walked out then, should have kept moving and pretended none of this had happened, but something held me there. Maybe the exhaustion, maybe the shock, or maybe the quiet certainty that this man had seen more than I wanted anyone to see. "You should not stand alone when you look like that," he said, not a question, not even concern, just a statement, and I felt my chest tighten because I did not know how to answer something that honest. "I am fine," I replied automatically, the words coming out softer than I intended, and he tilted his head slightly, studying me in a way that made it clear he did not believe me, not even a little. "No," he said, just that one word, controlled and absolute. And for some reason it did not feel like contradiction, it felt like truth. I glanced past him, just for a second, and that was enough, because Daniel was still there, still laughing, still unaware that the version of me who had walked in minutes ago no longer existed, and something must have changed in my expression, because when I looked back, the man in front of me followed my line of sight without needing to ask. He did not react immediately, did not show surprise or anger, just observed, taking in the scene with a level of focus that made my skin prickle, like he was not just seeing what was happening, but understanding it completely. "Do you want to leave?" he asked after a moment, his voice quieter now, almost private despite the crowded room, and I hesitated, because leaving felt like surrender and staying felt impossible, and I realized I did not know which one hurt more. My hand moved again, instinctively, resting over my stomach, and his gaze dropped briefly, not in confusion, not in curiosity, but in recognition, like he understood the weight of that gesture without needing it explained. When his eyes lifted back to mine, something had shifted, subtle but undeniable, a decision forming behind that calm exterior, and for the first time that night, I felt the air around me change, like something inevitable had just begun. I should have said yes, should have walked out and let the night end there, but something in his voice made the question feel different, like it was not about leaving the restaurant, but about leaving something much bigger behind, and I was not ready to answer that, not yet, so I shook my head before I could think it through, a small, almost invisible movement, but he noticed it immediately. "Then stay," he said, just as calmly, as if the decision had already been made, and before I could ask what that meant, he stepped past me, not brushing against me, not rushing, just moving forward with a quiet certainty that drew attention without asking for it. I turned instinctively, my heart picking up again as I watched him walk toward the table I had just tried to escape, each step measured, unhurried, but undeniable, and that was when I noticed the subtle shift in the room. Conversations lowering, heads turning, staff straightening like they had suddenly remembered something important. Daniel did not notice at first, too focused on the woman across from him, still smiling, still playing a role that no longer included me, and for a brief second I wondered if it would be easier if he never saw me at all, if I could just disappear quietly and let him keep whatever version of reality he had chosen. But then the man in the dark suit stopped beside their table, and everything changed. He did not raise his voice, did not make a scene, but the effect was immediate, like a line had been drawn that no one else could cross. Daniel looked up, confusion flickering across his face, quickly replaced by irritation, the kind he used when something interrupted his plans, and I felt my chest tighten because I knew that expression too well, knew what came after it, but this time it did not unfold the way I expected. "You are sitting in the wrong place," the man said, his tone even, almost polite, and for a moment Daniel just stared at him, clearly trying to decide whether to laugh or push back, but something in the way those words were delivered made the choice less simple than it should have been. "Excuse me," Daniel replied, leaning back slightly, attempting confidence, but I could hear the edge in his voice, the uncertainty he tried to hide, and it made something inside me shift again, because I had never seen him hesitate like that before. The woman across from him glanced between them, her smile fading just enough to show discomfort, and I realized then that this was no longer just about me. It was about control, about presence, about a kind of power that did not need to be explained to be understood. "You heard me," the man continued, not louder, not sharper, just clearer, and that was when Daniel's gaze flicked past him, finally landing on me standing near the entrance, and everything on his face changed at once, surprise, guilt, calculation, all of it colliding in a single moment that felt like it stretched too long. "Emily," he said, my name sounding unfamiliar in his mouth, like he had not used it in a way that mattered for a long time. And I felt the urge to step back, to shrink away from the attention, but I did not move, not this time. The man in front of him followed his gaze, confirming what he already knew, and then looked back at Daniel with a quiet finality that made the air feel heavier. You chose the wrong person to forget, he said, and there was no anger in it, no raised emotion, just truth, the kind that does not leave room for argument. And in that moment, standing there with my heart still unsteady and my hand resting over the life I had not yet told anyone about, I realized this was no longer a private betrayal. It had become something else entirely, something that was about to change everything whether I was ready for it or not. Daniel stood up too quickly, his chair scraping against the floor in a sharp sound that cut through the low murmur of the room. And for the first time since I had known him, he looked unsure of himself, like the ground beneath him was no longer as steady as he believed it to be. What is this supposed to mean? He asked, trying to regain control, his voice carrying just enough volume to draw attention, but not enough to command it, and that difference mattered more than anything. The man in the dark suit did not react to the tone, did not rise to meet it. He simply remained where he was, composed, unshaken, as if Daniel's words had no weight unless he chose to give them meaning. It means, he said slowly, each word deliberate, that some things are not yours to disregard. And there was something in the way he said it that made the air feel tighter, like the space between breaths had narrowed without warning. The woman at the table shifted in her seat, her earlier confidence fading into something uncertain, her eyes moving between them, searching for an exit that no longer seemed obvious. And I realized then that whatever this was, it was no longer contained to just one moment. It was expanding, pulling everyone into it whether they wanted to be part of it or not. Emily, Daniel said again, this time more urgently, stepping around the table as if he could simply walk past everything that had just happened and return to something familiar, something manageable. But when he moved, the man in front of him did not step aside, did not block him in an obvious way, just stood there, unmoving, and somehow that was enough. I felt my breath catch, my fingers pressing lightly against my stomach again, grounding myself in something real as the tension stretched thinner and thinner. You should not be here, Daniel continued, his voice softer now, directed at me, as if lowering it could undo what I had already seen, as if speaking quietly could make the truth less visible. And for a second, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, the way he still believed he could control the narrative even now. No, I said, and my voice surprised me, steady in a way I did not expect. I think I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The words hung there between us, simple, undeniable, and something in his expression shifted again, not anger this time, but something closer to realization, like he was beginning to understand that this moment was not going to bend in his favor. The man beside him turned his head slightly, just enough to look at me again, and there was a brief pause, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us without needing to be spoken, before he stepped forward, closing the small distance that Daniel had tried to create. You made your choice tonight, he said, his tone still even, still controlled, but there was something final in it now, something that did not leave room for revision or excuse, and Daniel's jaw tightened, as if he wanted to respond, to argue, to push back. But the words did not come as easily as they used to. Around us, the restaurant had fallen into that strange, suspended silence again, conversations fading into whispers, attention drawn without invitation, and I could feel the weight of it pressing in from all sides. But for the first time since I walked in, I did not feel like I was shrinking under it. I felt still, watching, waiting. The man in the dark suit shifted his gaze once more, briefly toward the table, then back to Daniel. And when he spoke again, it was quieter, but somehow carried further. And now, he said, you will live with it. And in that moment, standing there with everything exposed and nothing left to pretend, I realized that whatever happened next was not about revenge or anger or even justice in the way I had imagined it. It was about something deeper, something that could not be undone, and for the first time, I was not afraid of what came after. For a moment, no one moved, not Daniel, not the woman beside him, not even the servers who had frozen mid-step with trays still balanced in their hands, and I realized it was not fear that held the room in place. It was certainty, the kind that settles in when something irreversible has just been said. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair like he used to when he was trying to think his way out of a problem, but this time it did not have the same effect. This time it only made him look smaller, less composed, less like the man who believed he could control everything around him. "This is between me and my wife," he said finally, the words careful, measured, as if he could reframe the situation into something private again, something manageable, and for a brief second, I almost believed he might succeed, that the moment would fold in on itself and return to something familiar. But the man beside him did not step back. He did not acknowledge the boundary Daniel tried to create. He simply looked at him, steady and unyielding, like the concept of between us no longer applied. "You forfeited that," he replied, his voice calm, not louder, not sharper, just absolute, and the finality of it settled deeper than any raised voice ever could. I felt my breath slow, not because the tension had disappeared, but because something inside me had shifted, something that had been waiting for permission to change. The woman at the table stood abruptly, smoothing her dress in a nervous motion, her eyes flicking toward the exit like she was calculating the distance, and for the first time since I had seen her, she looked unsure, like she had stepped into something she did not fully understand. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me, and there it was again, that flicker of something that might have been regret if it had come sooner, if it had come before everything was already broken. "Emily, we can talk about this," he said, taking a step forward, his tone softer now, almost pleading, but the words felt hollow, like they had been rehearsed too late to matter. I shook my head, not dramatically, not with anger, just a small, quiet refusal, and it felt heavier than anything I could have said out loud. "We already did," I answered, my voice steady, and I realized it was true. The conversation had already happened, just not with words, not in the way he expected. The man beside him shifted slightly, his attention returning to me for a brief moment, and there was something different in his expression now, not softer, not kinder, but more focused, like the situation had clarified into something precise. "You do not owe him another explanation," he said, and the statement settled over me in a way I had not anticipated, because I had spent so long believing I needed to justify everything, to explain, to fix, to make things right even when I was the one being hurt. Daniel let out a short breath, frustration breaking through the composure he was trying to maintain. "And you are what exactly?" he asked, his voice tightening. "Her lawyer? Her bodyguard? What is this?" The question hung in the air, sharp but uncertain, and for the first time, the man in the dark suit allowed the faintest shift in his expression, not a smile, not amusement, just a subtle acknowledgement that the question itself was irrelevant. "I am the one who noticed," he said simply, and there was something about that answer that carried more weight than anything else he could have claimed, because it was true in a way that could not be challenged. I felt it then, clearly, the difference between being seen and being overlooked, between being valued and being dismissed, and it settled into my chest with a quiet certainty that I could not ignore. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly, the fight leaving him in small, almost imperceptible pieces, and I understood then that this was not a moment he could win, not because of who stood in front of him, but because of what he had already chosen to lose. The man beside him stepped back then, just enough to create space, not as permission, not as retreat, but as a signal that the decision was no longer his to influence. And when I looked at Daniel one last time, I did not feel anger. I did not feel the need to argue or demand anything from him. I just felt finished, like a chapter had closed without needing to be rewritten. And as I turned away, my hand resting once more over the quiet, steady reminder of what still mattered, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was not walking away from something. I was walking towards something I had not yet seen. The night air felt colder when I stepped outside, the rain no longer heavy but steady, like the city itself had exhaled and settled into something quieter, and for the first time since everything had unfolded, I could hear my own breathing again, uneven but slowing, grounding me in the present instead of the moment I had just left behind. The door closed softly behind me, muffling the distant hum of the restaurant, and I did not look back, not because I was afraid of what I would see, but because I already knew there was nothing there for me anymore. My hand rested against my stomach again, instinctively, protectively, And this time the gesture felt different, not like I was bracing for impact, but like I was holding on to something steady, something that had not been touched by any of it. Footsteps followed a few seconds later, measured, unhurried, and I did not need to turn to know who it was. The presence alone was enough, calm and deliberate, like he had already decided where he belonged in this moment. He stopped beside me, not too close, not distant either, just enough to be there without taking anything away, and for a second neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us in a way that did not feel uncomfortable, just intentional. "You walked away without hesitation," he said finally, his voice quieter out here, but no less steady, and I let out a small breath I did not realize I had been holding. "I think I hesitated long enough before tonight," I answered, my eyes fixed on the rain hitting the pavement, each drop breaking apart on contact, and there was something about that rhythm that made everything feel more real. He did not respond right away, and when I glanced at him, he was watching me, not intensely, not intrusively, just observing, like he was trying to understand something without forcing it into words. "You are not as fragile as you think," he said after a moment, and the statement caught me off guard, not because it was wrong, but because no one had said anything like that to me in a long time. I shook my head slightly, a faint, almost humorless smile touching my lips. "You did not see me 5 minutes ago," I replied, but he did not look convinced, his expression unchanged, grounded in something deeper than what had just happened inside. "I saw enough," he said, and there was a certainty in that answer that made it difficult to argue, like he had already drawn his conclusions, and they were not easily shaken. A car passed by, tires slicing through the wet street, headlights briefly illuminating the space between us before fading again, and in that fleeting light, I caught a clearer look at him, the sharp lines of his features, the calm in his posture, the kind of control that did not need to be proven because it was simply there. "Why did you step in?" I asked, the question coming out softer than I intended, but it had been sitting in my chest since the moment he reached for me, and I needed to hear the answer, even if I did not know what it would mean. He did not answer immediately, his gaze shifting briefly toward the street, then back to me, like he was deciding how much to say, how much to leave unspoken. "Because you should not have to face something like that alone," he said finally, and the simplicity of it made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain, because it was not dramatic, not grand, just true. I looked down for a moment, my fingers pressing lightly against my stomach again, and when I lifted my eyes back to his, something in my expression must have changed, because his gaze followed the movement, settling there for a fraction of a second longer than before, not questioning, not intruding, just noticing. "You are carrying more than you are saying," he added quietly, and my breath caught, not from fear, but from the realization that there was no pretending here, no easy way to deflect or redirect, and for a second I considered denying it, keeping it to myself a little longer, but the words did not come. Instead, I nodded, just once, and that small admission felt heavier than anything I had said all night. He did not react with surprise, did not ask questions, did not press for details. He simply absorbed it, the way he seemed to absorb everything, steady and composed, and when he spoke again, his voice carried that same quiet certainty. "Then you need stability," he said, and there was something about the way he framed it, not as advice, not as suggestion, but as fact, that made me pause, because stability was not something I had allowed myself to think about yet, not in a way that felt real. I let out a slow breath, the rain continuing its steady rhythm around us, and for the first time since I walked into that restaurant, I felt like the night had shifted into something else entirely, something I did not expect, something I could not fully understand yet, but something that, for reasons I could not explain, did not feel uncertain anymore. I let his words settle, not pushing them away, not fully accepting them either, just holding them there between us as the rain continued to fall in quiet, steady lines, and for the first time I allowed myself to consider what he was saying, not as an interruption to my night, but as a possibility I had not prepared for. Stability. The word felt foreign in my chest, like something I had not been allowed to want for a long time, something that always seemed just out of reach no matter how carefully I tried to hold everything together. "That is not something you can just decide," I said after a moment, my voice softer now, less defensive, because arguing with him did not feel the same as arguing with Daniel. It did not feel like I was trying to protect something fragile. It felt like I was being asked to face something real. He watched me for a second, not disagreeing, not correcting, just listening in a way that made my own words sound clearer, more honest than I expected. "No," he said finally, "but it is something you can choose when it is offered." I looked at him then, really looked this time, trying to understand what he meant, because nothing about this felt accidental anymore. Not the way he had stepped in, not the way he had stayed, not the way he spoke as if he had already decided something I had not yet caught up to. "And you are offering that?" I asked, the question coming out more direct than anything I had said so far, and for a brief moment, the corner of his expression shifted, not quite a smile, not quite something softer, just an acknowledgement that I had finally asked the right question. "I am offering you a way forward that does not leave you standing in the rain questioning your worth," he replied, and the simplicity of it landed deeper than anything complicated ever could, because it was not about control, it was not about ownership, it was about something I had almost forgotten how to recognize. I exhaled slowly, my gaze dropping to the pavement again, watching the reflections distort and reform with every passing car, and I realized that the version of me who had walked into that restaurant would have said no without thinking, would have rejected anything unfamiliar just to hold on to what was already breaking. But that version of me had already ended tonight. "You do not even know me," I said quietly, not as a challenge, but as a truth I needed to acknowledge, and he did not hesitate. "I know enough," he answered, his voice steady. "I know how you stood there and did not make a scene, how you walked away instead of begging for something that should have been given freely, and I know that you are carrying something that deserves more than uncertainty." His gaze dropped briefly to my hand resting over my stomach again, not intrusive, not lingering, just enough to remind me that he had not missed anything, and that detail, that quiet awareness, made my chest tighten in a way I could not easily explain. I wrapped my arms lightly around myself, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything shifting too quickly, and for a second I felt that familiar pull of hesitation, the instinct to retreat, to step back into something known even if it hurt. "What if I am not ready?" I asked, the words barely above the sound of the rain. And this time he did not answer right away, his eyes steady on mine, considering, measuring, not in a way that felt judgmental, but in a way that felt precise. "Then you take a step, not a leap," he said finally, and there was something about the way he said it that eased the pressure I had been building in my own mind, like he was not asking for everything at once, just enough to move forward. A black car pulled up to the curb beside us, smooth and quiet, the kind that did not draw attention unless you knew what to look for, and I noticed the way the driver remained still, waiting, not impatient, not questioning, just ready, and I realized then that nothing about this man was unplanned, not the timing, not the presence, not the offer he had just made. He glanced toward the car for a brief second before looking back at me, and when he spoke again, his voice carried that same quiet certainty that had followed him since the moment he stepped into my night. "Come with me," he said, not as a demand, not as pressure, but as an invitation that did not need to be repeated, and for a second, everything else faded, the restaurant behind me, the past I had just left, the uncertainty that had been following me for months, leaving only this moment, this choice, and the realization that sometimes the most important decisions do not come when you feel ready. They come when you finally see clearly enough to choose anyway. The word hung between us longer than it should have, not because it was unclear, but because it was too clear, too simple for something that felt this complicated, and I realized that I had spent so much time overthinking every possible outcome that the idea of just stepping forward, even one step, felt unfamiliar, almost impossible to trust. The car door behind him opened quietly, not rushed, not forced, just waiting, and I could see the soft glow of the interior lights reflecting against the wet pavement, steady and warm against the cold gray of the street. I looked at it for a second, then back at him, my thoughts moving faster than I could organize them, weighing everything I knew against everything I did not. "If I get in that car," I said slowly, my voice steady but softer than before, "I am not just leaving a place, I am leaving a life." He did not interrupt, did not rush to reassure me, just let the truth of that statement exist between us, and that alone made me trust him more than if he had tried to convince me otherwise. "Yes," he said after a moment, his tone unchanged, You are. No hesitation. No sugarcoating. Just honesty. And for some reason, that made the decision feel less frightening, not because it was easier, but because it was real. I exhaled slowly, my gaze drifting once more to the restaurant behind me, the glass doors reflecting faint movement inside. A life I had been part of just an hour ago, now distant, already fading into something that no longer fit. I could walk back in. I could explain. I could try to rebuild something that had already shown me exactly what it was. The thought lingered for a second, then disappeared just as quickly, because deep down, I already knew that staying would not be fixing anything. It would be pretending, and I was too tired to pretend anymore. My hand rested over my stomach again, more firmly this time, and the quiet awareness of what I was carrying grounded me in a way nothing else could, because this was not just about me anymore. It was about what came next, what kind of life I was choosing not just for myself, but for someone who depended on me before they had even taken their first breath. I looked up at him again, searching his expression one more time, expecting to find something that would make me hesitate, something that would tell me this was too uncertain, too risky, but there was nothing like that there, just calm, just presence, just a certainty that did not feel forced or demanding. One step, I repeated quietly, almost to myself, and he inclined his head slightly, acknowledging it without pushing further. The rain continued to fall, steady, constant, like time itself refusing to pause for decisions that felt this significant, and I realized that if I waited for the perfect moment, I would still be standing here hours from now, caught between what I knew and what I feared. So I moved. Not quickly, not dramatically, just one step forward, closing the distance between where I was and where he stood, and in that small movement, something inside me shifted, not completely, not all at once, but enough to feel it. His gaze followed me, steady, not surprised, like he had expected this outcome without needing to assume it. And when I reached the car, I paused for just a fraction of a second before placing my hand on the door. The metal was cool under my fingers, grounding, real, and for a moment I closed my eyes, letting everything I had just left behind settle into something final, something that did not need to be revisited to be understood. Then I opened the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the car wrapped around me immediately, soft and quiet, a sharp contrast to the rain outside, and I realized that for the first time that night, I was not reacting to what had happened, I was choosing what came next. The door closed behind me with a soft, definitive sound, and through the window, I saw him walk around to the other side, unhurried, composed, like this had always been the direction the night was going to take. When he finally sat beside me, the space shifted again, not crowded, not overwhelming, just certain, and as the car pulled away from the curb, the restaurant fading into the distance behind us, I understood something I had not been able to see before. I did not lose everything tonight. I let go of what was never truly mine to keep. The city lights stretched into long, blurred lines against the rain-streaked window as the car moved forward, steady and unhurried, like it had nowhere to rush to and nothing left to chase. And for a while, neither of us spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because the silence itself felt necessary, like words would only interrupt something that was still settling into place. I sat with my hands folded loosely in my lap, my thumb brushing absently over my knuckles, grounding myself in the small, familiar motion, while my other hand rested protectively against my stomach again, a quiet reminder that everything about my life had already changed whether I had fully processed it or not. The warmth inside the car was a contrast I could feel in my bones, soft and controlled, so different from the cold uncertainty I had stepped out of just minutes ago, and I realized how quickly an environment could shift the way you felt, how a space could either drain you or hold you together. "Where are we going?" I asked finally, my voice calm but quieter than before, not out of fear, but out of awareness that this moment mattered more than any question I had asked that night. He did not look at me right away, his gaze forward, steady, the city reflecting faintly in his eyes before he answered. "Somewhere you can breathe," he said, and there was something about that answer that made my chest tighten, not from anxiety, but from the realization that I had not truly felt that in a long time. I nodded slightly, letting the words settle, because I understood what he meant without needing a location or a name. It was not about a destination, It was about a state I had been missing without realizing how much it mattered. The car turned smoothly onto a quieter street, the noise of the main road fading behind us, replaced by something softer, more contained, and I found myself watching the passing buildings without really seeing them, my mind catching up to everything that had happened, replaying moments I had already lived through but now understood differently. "You are not asking me for anything," I said after a while, the thought forming slowly but clearly, and this time he did glance at me, just briefly, his expression unchanged but attentive. "No," he replied, simple and direct, and that answer held more weight than if he had listed conditions or expectations, because it meant there was no immediate transaction, no hidden agreement I was being pulled into without knowing it. I let out a small breath, my shoulders relaxing just slightly, and for the first time since the night began, I did not feel like I was being pulled in multiple directions. I felt, still, like the noise had quieted enough for me to hear my own thoughts again. "Most people would," I added, almost to myself, and he did not disagree, did not correct me, just acknowledged it with a faint, almost imperceptible shift of his head. "Most people do not recognize value until they have lost it," he said, and the words were not directed at Daniel, not entirely. They felt broader than that, like a statement shaped by experience rather than a single moment, and something about that made me look at him differently, not just as the man who stepped in, but as someone who understood loss in a way he did not need to explain. The car slowed as we approached a building set slightly back from the street, understated but unmistakably refined, the kind of place that did not need to announce itself to be recognized, and when it came to a stop, the engine idled quietly, giving me space to take in the moment before anything else changed. I looked at the entrance, then back at him, my thoughts, clearer now than they had been all night, not because everything made sense, but because I had stopped trying to force it to. "I do not know what happens next," I admitted, my voice steady, and this time, when he turned to face me fully, there was something in his expression that felt almost grounding, like he was not expecting certainty from me, just honesty. "You do not need to," he said, and there it was again, that calm, unwavering certainty that did not demand, did not pressure, just existed as something solid to stand beside. I nodded once, absorbing it, letting the simplicity of that answer take the place of all the questions I had been carrying, and as I reached for the door handle, I realized that this was not about knowing the outcome. It was about choosing a direction, and for the first time in a long time, I was not choosing out of fear or obligation. I was choosing because something in me had finally recognized that I deserved more than what I had been settling for. The door opened, the night air meeting me again, but this time it did not feel as cold, and as I stepped out, I understood something that I would carry long after this moment passed, that sometimes the person who changes your life is not the one who promises you everything, but the one who quietly shows you that you no longer have to accept less.